Get your Bibles out and turn to the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel, and go to chapter number 12. Recall that we're studying the idea or the doctrine or the processes of affliction. Affliction, and some of the things surrounding afflictions that we might not know, but that we need to know when we're facing afflictions. One of the things we'll see this morning and here in 2 Samuel chapter 12, the idea that sin is visited with afflictions. Sin is visited with afflictions. It's not always so. Remember Job. Job had sinned not. Job was righteous. God even bragged upon Job in heaven. And Job had not sinned and did not sin through the entire process of his afflictions. But his afflictions served God's purpose in showing us we can make it by his grace. We'll be able to get through by his grace. Now look at David here, 2 Samuel chapter 12, and go down, if you will. Let's start verse number 11. Thus saith the Lord, Behold, I will raise up evil against thee. How? Now that's tough, isn't it? Your own family. We know that to be true. And his son named Absalom led a rebellion and even actually got to sit on the throne for a while. But notice this, out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes and give them unto thy neighbor, and he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this son. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. Now, here's God showing David that his sin was not hid like he thought it was. Now, of course, we know the sin of Bathsheba. And here's Nathan now, and here's what David's response was, and it's very important for us to see this response. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against who? He realized it. Now, yes, he had sinned against Uriah. Yes, he'd sinned against Bathsheba. Yes, that little child was involved in that sin. But notice what he says, And Nathan said unto David, The Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. In other words, you've got hope, David. The Lord's not going to destroy you. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. The afflictions because of sin. And you'll find several occasions where David was involved in sin. And David was punished because of sin, or his kingdom was punished. Recall that David sinned and had Absalom, or not Absalom, but his Joab go out and number the children of Israel. God didn't honor that. So God sent Nathan again to David and said, you pick. What do you want? Choice between you being afflicted and stricken, the enemy coming and taking over your kingdom, or a plague. And David said, I can't choose. But God chose for him and chose that affliction where many thousands died from a plague. And the plague was stayed by God's mercy. So the idea I want you to see here is that sin can be visited with afflictions. And notice it says, David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose and went to him to raise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. And it came to pass on the seventh day, what happened? That the child died, just as God said the child would. And they feared to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spake unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he then vex himself if we tell him that the child is dead? But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto the servant, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. Then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel and came into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him and did eat. Then said his servants unto him, What thing is this that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive, but when the child was dead, thou didst rise and eat bread. And he said, While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, Who can tell whether God will be gracious to me, that the child may live? But now he is dead, wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? And notice what he says. I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. In other words, the child's not coming back. Now David acted practically in this matter. He sought God, he beseeched God to spare the child. But what did Nathan tell him? That the child was surely going to die. And God had said that because of David's occasion for the enemies of Israel to blaspheme God. Because David was the king and he had committed these atrocious things, he had marred, as it were, God's holiness. He had brought blaspheme to God's kingdom. Therefore, David had to be punished. And sin can be visited by affliction. I want you to see another one. Go, if you will, over to Psalm 89 on this topic. Psalm 89. And go down to verse 30. Psalm 89. Go down to verse number 30. We'll go 30 through 32. If his children forsake my law and walk not in my judgments, if they break my statutes and keep not my commandments, notice what God promises. Then will I visit their what? With what? Now what is the rod?
That's what the shepherd used.
Remember the shepherd? He had two implements that he used on a daily basis. One was the rod, the other was the staff. One had a crook in it. It was designed to pick up sheep and to lead sheep and etc. The other was a rod, and he would use that to discipline the sheep. He would use it also to beat off the enemies. So the idea of the rod there carries the idea of a stick for punishment. Punishment. And notice what God says again. Then will I visit their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with what? Stripes. And the idea carries the lash. If you think about the stripes that were placed upon the Lord by that cat of nine tails, where they scourged him with that whip. So you see the idea of punishment. And why was that punishment coming? Why did God say this? Because it's plain. He said, if they do this, then will I visit their transgression with the rod, and their iniquity with stripes. So we see here that afflictions can come because of sin. Now I want you to see the next part, and that is often afflictions are and can be severe. Go, if you will, over to Exodus chapter number 10. Exodus chapter number 10. Go to verse 1 and 2. Exodus 10. Now recall the setting here in Exodus. Moses is visiting Pharaoh, saying, let my people go. Verse 10, chapter 10, verse 1 says, and the Lord said unto Moses, go in unto Pharaoh, For I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I might show thee these my signs before him. Now notice this. God's going to show Pharaoh and the world, and still showing the world today, that he has the power. Verse 2, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and of thy son's son what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, and why, that ye may know how that I am the Lord. Now recall from this chapter forward, the plagues get more severe, with the final plague being the death of the firstborn on the day of Passover. Recall that Moses received instructions to take the blood of a lamb for each household, to take a lamb and to take that blood and apply it to the doorpost and the lintel. If that house did not have that blood upon the door, what would happen? The death angel would come through and take the firstborn in each house. And not just of the house, but also of the animals. Recall the firstborn of the animals were taken too. Now think about that. What happens if you take away the progeny of a cow or herd or whatever you want to call it, flock? Or what happens if you take away the fathers? You start losing that generation. You start losing the solidity of the flock. Now what happens if you take the firstborn of the children? You're going to take away the strength or the hope of that army, because the firstborn would be the oldest. Most times they're going to be the oldest. And if they're the firstborn, God says, I'm going to take them. And why was he taking them? Because Pharaoh had hardened his heart and had refused to let the people go. Now, God was fair in this. He warned Pharaoh, did he not? He told Pharaoh exactly what he was going to do, yet what happened each time? Pharaoh refused. So we find that afflictions can often be severe. That's a severe affliction, you think about it. The death of the firstborn, or any of these plagues, the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, that plague of hail and fire, the frogs, and the one I think would be the worst would be the lice. Think about that, the plague of lice. And then flies and frogs. All those plagues came as a result of Pharaoh afflicting the children of Israel. So God afflicted Egypt and Pharaoh and his kingdom. Now look over, if you will, at Psalm 42. And the same idea here, the same thought, Psalm 42. Often that when afflictions come, they can be severe. Psalm 42. And look down to verse number 7. Psalm 42, verse number 7. Now this is how we feel. Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts. All thy waves and thy billows are what? Now what's the feeling here? You're drowning. More than just drowning, you're in a storm with no hope. The waves have overcome you. Like, let's say that you're in a little rowboat. Remember the apostles out there in that rowboat all night long, rowing and rowing and rowing. They had rowed all night and nothing had happened. They hadn't gotten anywhere. But here comes Jesus walking on the water. But here we see the idea here is the storm has come upon him and the waves were overflowing him. But then there's hope. Look at verse 8. It says, yet the Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me, my prayer unto the God, now notice this, of my life. God is in control. Something that we've seen this morning as we look at the idea of idolatry and how that men have deceived themselves and then believed the lies of the devil and have set up all of these false gods and false hopes and have wasted all of their efforts and all of their resources on establishing false gods when the true and the living God is here, and he's here for us. And notice this, he says, the God of my life. Who's in charge of us? Oh, a lot of men want to say, I'm in charge. I'm the boss of myself. You can't tell me what to do. That's that rebel nature in us, isn't it? You can't tell me what to do. I'm my own boss. I am responsible for me, and that's true. You are responsible for you, but who is the God of your life? Is it this world, or is it the God above, the true and the living God? You know, the devil's a liar and the father of all lies. He's a murderer from the beginning. What's going to happen to old Slewfoot? He's going to go to the lake of fire. He's not going to pass go. He's not going to go to jail. He's going to go directly to the lake of fire that burneth with fire and brimstone. Now, that's what's going to happen to the devil. What happens to all those who follow after him? They're going to follow him right into that place called the lake of fire shortly thereafter. So think of this. God sometimes sends these storms in our lives and overflows us with these waves and these crashing storms all around us. And it feels like there's no hope, but yet look at the next verse. He's the God of my life, and he knows how to get me out of these storms of life. Look over at Psalm 66 while you're hearing the Psalms. Psalm 66, and go down to verse number 12. Often storms or afflictions can be severe. Psalm 66, and look, if you will, down to verse 12. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads. Now think of this. There's a word picture for you. What does that mean, to ride over our heads? That means we're laying down in the battle, and these horses are riding roughshod over us. Now, if you've ever been around a horse, how would you like to be laying on the ground when the horse is stomping around? That's the idea, that the word picture that he wants you to see here. Now, notice what he says. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, but thou broughtest us out into a wealthy place. Now, notice this song that is singing praises unto God. You think about the removal and how God had placed them in a ring of fire, but yet they were safe. At night and by day, it was a ring of clouds that would block out that severe sun. It'd give them shade. It'd give them a comfortable temperature to go through the wilderness in. Boy, God was blessing them. Wherever place they stepped, they had water. Every place they stepped, they had food. Every place they stepped, they had shoes that would not wear out. Boy, I'd like a pair of them shoes. Shoes that won't wear out. One of these days, I'm going to get them too. Shoes that won't wear out. God was blessing them, yet what did they do at every turn? Oh, I wish we were back in Egypt. Wish we were back in the world. Wish we had all those things of the world again. But think about it. What good would those things of the world do us? You see, they don't do us any good. They profit nothing. They're just lies of the devil to deceive us and to take us away from the truth. He says, but thou broughtest us out into a wealthy place. So one of the things about those afflictions is that God uses them for our good. And we'll look at that in just a minute. But there's another point I want to make. Look at Ezra, back at Ezra, chapter number 9. Ezra, chapter number 9, right before Nehemiah. If you stop and think about afflictions, God often, how would you say, tempers our afflictions. He doesn't give us what we deserve. Think of this. Look at Ezra's prayer in Ezra 9, and go down, if you will, to verse number 13. He's making this confession here. And after all that has come upon us, now notice why. For our evil deeds and for our great trespass, seeing that thou, our God, has punished us. Now notice what he says here. Less than our iniquities deserve, and has given us such deliverance as this. Notice how he phrases it. He says again, has punished us less than our iniquities deserved. Did God deserve to punish them more? Yes. What had Israel done? Remember, we talked about that, and we often speak of that. Look how they were doing there in Israel. Every high place had an altar on it. Every grove you could find, every green grove you could find, had an altar in it. You go down to the temple, and they had secret rooms inside the temple, and all the strange gods of nature, and all the gods, the stars, and the sun, and the moon, and all those kind of gods in these secret chambers, and the priests would sneak in there. They go into that chamber, and they put on their robes and offer sacrifice unto those gods. Then they come out. Before they come out, they put their good robes on and go in and then try to worship God. Boy, how do you think God felt about that? God could have just like that and just destroyed them instantly. But rather than that, he sent his people out into captivity. But now look, here's Ezra. Ezra is at the brink of just getting established back to the promised land, back to Israel. God had spared them. He didn't completely annihilate them, although they deserved to be completely annihilated because of their sin, did they not? They had turned upon God. They had betrayed God. They had rejected God and taken on the gods of this world. They wanted to act like the world. They were acting like the world. They had turned their noses up at God and said, we don't want you, we want this. So God punished them. But he gave them less than what they deserved. Think about this. When God punishes you, how much do you deserve? Think about that question. Look at Psalm 103. Psalm 103, the same thought. Psalm 103, verse 10. He hath not dealt with us after our sins, nor rewarded us according to what? He's not punishing us like he could, is the idea. Or like he should. Think of a merciful God. A God that could have allowed us to go to hell and him still be justified, still be holy, still be perfect, and still be a sovereign, righteous God. He could allow us to drop off into hell at any minute, and we would justly deserve that. But he doesn't. He showed mercy and love for his children, and still showing us that mercy and grace in the age that we live in right now. Right now is the opportunity that we must preach the gospel. Right now, while the age is here, that we preach the truth to people, that they might know that the judgment is coming, punishment is coming, and unless men repent, then they'll be right there in that punishment, in the midst of it, right there with the devil, facing that lake of fire, and ultimately facing each and every sin they've ever done. God often gives us less than we deserve. Think about that, how God spared us in salvation. How that one day God says, all right, I'm going to save you, and does. He didn't have to save us. He wasn't obligated to save us, but he did so willingly and out of love. Now, I want you to see this. Frequently, the afflictions end in good. Frequently, afflictions end in good. Go to Genesis 50. One of the best accounts of this thought about providence. Genesis 50, and go down to verse 20. Everybody remember Joseph? This is the end. Israel has died now. Okay? Israel has died, and his brothers are worried. And what's Joseph going to do to us now? Daddy's gone. Boy, we sure betrayed him. We were going to kill him. We sold him into slavery, and we got partied over all that money that we got for him. Oh, what's he going to do to us? He's going to kill us. I know for sure he's going to kill us. So they were scared. And look what Joseph says in verse 20. He says, "But as for you, ye thought evil against me." He's true there, isn't it? That's the truth. What did his brothers have in their heart to do to him? They were going to kill him. And the only thing that spared him from that death was that caravan just happened to come along. Just happened, huh? God sent that caravan to be right there at that point in time when Joseph was thrown into that pit. And his brother, Reuben, didn't want to see him killed. They said, "Hey, look over yonder. Let's make some money out of this deal and pretend that he's dead to Daddy. And we'll make a little money on the side here and we'll be shut of our problem." Well, who do you think sent that caravan by? God. But look what he says. "As for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it," wow, how? "Unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." Think of that. God's providence had intervened in Joseph's life. Joseph could have been dead, laying there in that pit and buried. But no, God had a plan and a purpose for Joseph going to Egypt. His brothers had murder in their heart, but God turned it into good. Joseph ended up in Egypt, and there he became the second man in Egypt. And ultimately, here he is now in control over his brothers too. And they are worried. But Joseph says, "Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. So Joseph said, "That's not me. God meant it for good, and that's the way I'm going with it." He could have been bitter his whole life. He deserved to be bitter all his whole life. Why? Because they had done what they'd done to him. Boy, he should have been bitter to them. No, he shouldn't. He knew that God had meant it for good. He had trusted in the providence of God, and God meant it for good. Romans 8:28. And let me give you another example of that. Go over to Ezekiel 20. Ezekiel 20. One more example. Ezekiel 20, and go down to verse 37. Ezekiel 20:37. "And I will cause you to pass under the what?" Now, I want you to see this word picture here. That rod, the shepherd would take when they bring them out of the field and into a sheepcote or a little pasture place. They would take that rod and stick it through the little gate. And when the sheep passed under it, what would that do for the sheep? It'd knock off the burrs and the leaves and stuff out of their fur and help them to be healthy. They'd knock all that stuff off of their wool that it would collect, all those burrs and all those things. Well, they'd stick those rods in there and the sheep would have to go under it, stick his head under it, and it would rub some of that stuff off of him. So that's the idea. Now notice this. He says here again, "And I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. And I will purge out from among you the rebels, and them that transgress against me. And I will bring them forth out of the country where they sojourn, and they shall not enter into the land of Israel. And ye shall know that" what? "I am the Lord." Verse 39, "As for you, O house of Israel, thus saith the Lord, go ye serve ye every one his idols, and hereafter also. If ye will not hearken unto me, but pollute ye my holy name no more with your gifts and with your idols. For my holy mountain, in the mountain of the height of Israel, saith the Lord God, there shall all the house of Israel, all of them in the land, serve me. There will I accept them. There will I require of your offerings, and the first fruits of your oblations with all your holy things. And I will accept you." See that? God says, I'm going to carry you off under the rod. When you leave here, you're going to know that it's me that has done this. You see, Israel was thinking, oh, it's just this politics over here, politics over there. We're going to dabble in politics, and we think that we can get Egypt and Syria to come help us. We're going to give them some money so they take some of the treasury money and go pay those heathen to defend them. And what happened to those heathen? They turned around and didn't defend them at all. What did they get for their money? Nothing. And who made sure of that? God. But you see, frequently the afflictions of life that come to us are for our good. Now go ahead and turn to Romans 8:28 just so that I can quote it right. And we know that all things work together for what? Good. But notice to who? To them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. You see, God can take afflictions and make good out of them. Sometimes we don't like afflictions. Sometimes it's not because we've sinned, it's just because we need pruning. We need a cleaning up. We need some of the burrs, the cockleburrs and the fuzz balls knocked off of us so that we can look better and act better, so that we can be healthier, so that we can be better servants. And sometimes God lays those afflictions upon us, but they're always ending good for us. But if we're being afflicted because of sin, they can be severe. They can be hard. They can even take us out. Sometimes they're designed to take us out. But ultimately, it's for our good. Think about that this morning. Let's all stand. Let's close with a word of prayer. Brother Aaron.